Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today it's a Thursday, and I'm delighted to be joined by JP Mason. How are you doing?
Hi, Paul. Sorry I missed last week. I was down in Leeds watching a gig, as mental people like me that love music do. There was a guy playing down in Leeds that I wanted to go and see, and so I was getting the train back up on the Thursday. And I must actually plug this while I mention that. So I was going to see two bands. One was Lonely Tourist, who were opening for Jim Bob from Carter, the Unstoppable Sex Machine. Two band names that probably will fly over the head of many people, but I was a big Carter fan when I was younger, and Paul's a friend of mine. If I'm allowed to say that I've got friends on here, I don't know if that's is frowned upon by some people in comments, but I do have some. He was opening for Jim Bob, so at the Brudenell Social Club, which is one of my favourite venues in the world. Never mind these shores. So it was a great gig, sold out, and I got this T-shirt. Paul's a big Celtic fan, and he said, "Can you wear that T-shirt?" And I said I was going to do it anyway. So yeah, here it is.
That's great to hear.
Check out Lonely Tourist's music. He's brilliant. He gets played on Six Music a lot. Steve Lamacq loves him. Was formerly in a band called Odeon Beat Club, who were also great. Supported Snow Patrol at King Tut's back in the day, way before I was working there, and supported Half Man Half Biscuit as well. Some people might know who they are.
All I Want for Christmas.
Aye, as a Duckler flag away top. So I missed last week, but I'm here to talk about Celtic and probably other stuff as well.
Well, other stuff's fine because the whole music vibe and angle will be discussed when we get round to that Celtic third kit. I've not spoken to you about it. You've got the Celtic jersey over your shoulder. You've got another jersey over your shoulder. We're going to link all that in. So you've opened up speaking about music, and that will come back into the conversation when we're talking about the third jersey. But yeah, it's interesting that because you put me in mind sometimes, JP, of my brother insofar as a football fan. It's taken for granted that they'll travel to see their team. They'll travel all over to see their team. But music fans, like my brother, like yourself, are very much like that as well. Once you're into a band, you'll go just about anywhere to see them, and festival time, you'll travel all over, etc. As well as your travels in a professional capacity when it comes to music, which, as I say, are documentary standard travels. Yesterday, I'm not going to say we got back to the football, but we got back to a sense of the normality of a game of football. So we could tune in live, for example. We could watch it. We could analyse it, cover it on here, JP, and then get a sense of where we are under Brendan Rodgers. I do mention social media reaction quite a bit on this show, JP, because it's just a part of day-to-day life, but it's also a big part of gauging the reaction of, let's say, someone releases a new track, or someone performs live. You can gauge the reaction of their fan base just by checking social media. And it's a bit the same when it comes to Celtic, isn't it? So yesterday, I seen a lot of reaction to the game, and we're going to cover the positives, as I say, but also we're going to take on board where we need to strengthen, because there are definitely areas for improvement in there, JP. So first and foremost, how good is it to be able to tune in and watch Celtic again?
It was great. I watched the first half. I had to leave my flat to go and work. Worked a show last night with the Slovenian and the Irish entries of the Eurovision Song Contest. Not a gig I ever thought I would be working in my life, but hearing a sold-out St. Luke's sing back songs in Slovenian is certainly something I didn't think I'd ever hear. It was quite something. Band are called Joker Out, and in their homeland they sold out an arena in 10 minutes. So I mean, wow. It must be a bit of a weird mindset to come and play smaller shows, but I think they're fully accepting of where they're at in terms of the rest of the world and whatnot. And it's all very well being big in your home country, but once you step out of there and try to play elsewhere, it's a bit different. But so I only saw the first half. And by all accounts, the second half was completely different to the first in terms of how the personnel lined up and how things went. And obviously, you look at the scoreline. I obviously looked at the scoreline on Twitter when I knew the game had finished, and I saw 6-4 But my immediate reaction wasn't like, "Oh my God, we got gubbed," or and that, because I saw the way it was going in the first half. It was a bit sporadic in terms of the bursts of play and whatnot. But I didn't think we looked that bad in the first half. I'm only basing. I've not seen the second half, so I can't comment at all. But a friend of mine, Stephen Fairley, who I met at the Martin O'Neill event at Bad. Remember the guy that I was talking to? Then we realised we were at the same school and we were in the same year.
Yes,
just we hadn't seen each other for 20 years. But he put a tweet out yesterday just saying something like, "Oh, Hart needs to go, blah, blah, blah." And it was obviously a knee-jerk tweet after the mistake. But then Hart made a few really good saves after that, to the point that you're like, well, okay, he's got... I mean, every goalkeeper's got a mistake in them. De Gea had a mistake in him. Was one of the most highest paid keepers ever. Mm-hmm. I'm not of the school of thought that thinks that we should just bin Joe Hart and bring in somebody else, because when we lost Fraser Forster, you find that you can go and spend $5 million on a goalkeeper and it doesn't work out.
Precisely.
So I would... He's got the trust of the dressing room quite clearly. I think he's got the trust of the manager, given what Brendan Rodgers has said about him so far. Although I wouldn't be surprised, obviously, if the rumours are to be true that Siegrist is probably going to move away, that we'll get another keeper, and that would be folly not to, because we're not going to rely on Scott Bain to get us through the season if something should happen to Hart. But I was encouraged. I thought Maeda was amazing. He continues to sort of beat back the critics who say that he's not got it in his law. I mean,
what was the word? What was the word that was used?
A fraud. It was
a fraud. I was going to say imposter there.
Yeah, as a fraud. a Japanese international whose numbers are pretty good for not a defined role really in the team. I mean, I guess he was a striker yesterday, but
yes, yeah,
he just... he plays all over the place, doesn't he? He's so fast. He's got so much energy. He'll be there at the end of the game. He's there at the start of the game. Fair enough, he maybe doesn't have the finesse that you would like him to have. But as my friend Chris said to me yesterday, if he had that finesse, we wouldn't have him. I mean, if he had everything to his game that on top of what he's got, there's no way we'd have held on to him. And the idea of him signing a 5-year deal would have been fantasy, I would have thought. But no, it was good to see the team play again, watch a game again. It feels like a long time since we did. It was really weird seeing Brendan Rodgers on the sidelines. I'm still kind of trying to get my head around that as a reality. But
I know.
I mean, you rewind back 4 or 5 months and tell us that Ange Postecoglou is the Spurs manager.
No chance.
And Chris Davies is his assistant. And Brendan Rodgers is back at Celtic.
And we're going to have wavy hoops. We're going to have wavy hoops for the home jersey.
And we've retained John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan, because I would have thought that Brendan Rodgers would have come in with his own team and that would have been a clear out. But I'm glad, like I've said before on here, I'm glad that they were kept for the consistency, and because they've been part of a successful Celtic setup for the last, barring one season, they've been there for... Kennedy's been there for whoever knows how long. How many years has Kennedy been there as a coach?
Ronnie Dyler's time. Mm-hmm. Ronnie Dyler's time. But you make a point there about Rodgers, and I'm just thinking, I had a similar thought yesterday when I seen him there, on the side of the park, and I'm thinking, will that become different? Will it become more of a reality, do you think, JP, when players come in that are clearly Rodgers players? Now, this isn't me having a dig at our recruitment policy, because our recruitment system and strategy works. So the players that are coming in, I don't have an issue with them, because I'm confident enough, unless the wheels come off further down the road, I'm confident enough that things are different between Brendan Rodgers and the club. So he brought up in one of the press conferences that there was an issue with recruitment, because he was being presented with players that were nowhere near the quality he needed. And he actually spoke about having players who were there and players who were over there. So, there was a real disparity between quality. But he then said that obviously he had spoken to the people who deal with recruitment, and he was happy and he was satisfied that the system that we have at the moment is going to work for him. So the 2 players with another 2 imminent that are coming in, you've got to just say, well, Brendan Rodgers has okayed him. He's rubber stamped him. Yeah, all the work's been done previously, months previously. In Tillio's case, apparently 2 years ago was the first interest that we had in him. But you're confident enough, right? They're not Rodgers signings as such, but he's okayed them. He's fine. He's ratified the deals. Everything's cool. But I think he'll feel different once he gets the 1 or 2 bodies in, JP, that you're looking at them thinking they're definitely Rodgers signings, And there's been a few guys linked to us. And I think that when I go back to the furore around him coming in first time round, and even that seeming a bit surreal, because big name, to bring in as a manager at that time. But he came in and there was boys that he brought in, and you knew they were his men, like Sinclair, like Toure. So it was a wee bit different. But I just think the identity of the side at the moment is still Angie's identity, but Rodgers is standing there on the sidelines. Once that changes a bit, it will feel a wee bit more normal.
I think anybody, myself included, that would be kind of concerned a little bit about these sort of so-called legacy signings, and obviously you're aware that there's been that issue in the past with Brendan Rodgers and the recruitment that was happening while he was there in the latter part of his first spell. But then the players that are there aren't his players either, but he's sanctioned new contracts for Kyogo and Maeda. So I don't get too concerned about the fact that obviously if you take Ange Postecoglou out of the equation, those players were brought into Celtic and those players were successful at Celtic because they're good players. Yes, they were coached well and everything else, but it should be the case, and you've said this before, that it should be the case that we bring players in and that they're of a standard that fits Celtic rather than fits the manager. Yeah. We shouldn't be signing players just because we've got a high-profile manager. We should be signing players based on their CV, their attributes and everything else. So Tillio could quite easily have come in under Ange Postecoglou and been hopefully the same success that he'll be under Brendan Rodgers. It should be more about the actual players, and obviously the recruitment and the fact that they've been tracking Tillio for 2 years, did he say?
Yeah.
So that means that they've been watching probably everything about him. Like, it's quite weird to think that. It's kind of sort of almost Big Brother-esque, but like it's all been about like how he's developed as a person, probably as well as his, the sort of cold hard stats that everyone looks at and the numbers and everything else. But I guess they'll just be looking at how he's become on as a person in the last 2 years, and his ability to adapt as a young guy to being over here. Because who's to say that the Bernabei signing hasn't been a great success so far because maybe he has struggled to adapt to living here. I'm playing devil's advocate. Maybe it's not. Maybe he'll never be a good player for Celtic, but maybe with another year under his in his locker, he'll be able to sort of develop further. People have made their minds up, as they very, very quickly do, about players. And not Kobayashi again was sort of thrown at the wolves yesterday. Starfelt again, not good enough apparently. It baffles me, some of the things that you read as comments. If it wasn't comments about how terrible the strip is, it's just negativity about the players. I know. It's so wild. Like, I know that online is a dangerous place to tread, but yesterday in particular, it seemed like people just were like, right, I'm going to load up both guns and go for it.
The thing with that, it's an interesting one. One example I'll use actually in terms of a player coming in, having confidence that as a club we can sign players, is Craig Gordon. I mean, Ronnie Dyle had nothing to do with that deal, and he turned into, top 5 modern day goalies. Over the last period, JP Mass, Celtic supporting life, certainly he's up there. Craig Gordon, what he achieved at the club. So, yeah, I don't have the concerns that I maybe did have when we were bringing in the likes of Bangura and Rami Gershon and, right up to Ismail Osoro and players like that, where you're thinking, where's the strategy here? This is just a player that's been presented to you by an agent and you've taken a punt on them. But with regards to the social media thing, obviously, we've lived through it. There's going to be a generation of people, JP, where it's always been there. I always think back to things that you're born into. You don't know what it's like before that thing was in place. It's omnipresent, and for virtually everybody, in fact, everybody that's alive right now, Celtic have been omnipresent in their life, right? They've always been there. But when we were younger, imagine the debut single by Wham. I can't, because we've always been there. You know what I mean? And then you live through things that you see them growing and developing and all the rest of it. So social media. I've got a bit of a view on it, because obviously I've been on the wrong end of a fair bit of abuse, I would say, over the last few years, simply for speaking about the club that I love and have done for a long, long time. But I've got my head around it, and I think I know why it happens, right? Other than the hairdo and the Matalan jackets and everything else. And I do think I know why it happens. So when, we've lived through the advent of the internet, and I know that there was a version of the internet prior to the one that we use in great numbers now, JP, right? But the thing is, when we went on to any kind of online site, we judged it, didn't we? We judged our meal. We judged the hotel you lived at. You judged your eBay purchase, or the movie you've just watched on IMDb, or your purchase on Amazon. And we basically got trained into that's how you use the internet. You just judge everything, don't you? And then social media came along. So this was a new thing. This came after we had already learned these habits of don't like it, negative comment, etc., etc., etc. And then we've started judging people and lives and opinions and performances. And it's so natural now, because it's embedded in our psyche that that's what you do on a phone. It's there with you virtually 24 hours a day. If it's not in your pocket, it's lying next to your bed. It's there constantly. So that judgmental thing, over a period of time, became normal. Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
totally.
So if you appear on somebody's phone, you're just an inanimate object, like the purchase of a toilet plunger that you've just made on Amazon. So you'll judge the person as much as you'll judge the object. So I don't take it personally now, I think, is what I'm saying, and I understand why people do it. And I did mention I got my first 1-star review for the Celtic jersey book during the week as well. And I'm not taking it personally, even though I've mentioned it twice on the show. I'm really keen to get everybody's thoughts on the action yesterday. Paddy, you're in nice and early. Paddy Lavery, goalkeeper badly needed. We're going to come back to this, because I wrote an article last week, JP, about the 10 players that personally I think we could offload, and it wouldn't really make a difference because they're not really contributing in any case. And they're 10 players who are deemed first-team players. I kind of based it on the fact that Brendan Rodgers likes a 17-man core group and a 25-man squad. He spoke about it. We've currently got 38 in the full-time team and the squad, 3 of which are out on loan. And I thought, well, you know what? We've got probably space to get rid of 10. And now I'm talking about footballers like their commodity. Just get rid of them, that kind of thing. It's not as easy as that. And I did have Bain in there because although he's signed a new contract, he's still our player. And if the manager comes in and doesn't fancy him, we can still sell him. Bain might get flipped for Siegrist, I don't know. But what I did say is, if we were to offload one more goalie, having already offloaded 2 so far, we would need to bring in another goalie. That wasn't really on Joe Hart, to be fair. That was more in the case of we need bodies. You need 3 goalies, don't you, in a season? And you need that 4th goalie to be a young Toby Uwulayemi type. So, yeah, I do think we need a goalkeeper. And if you're going to bring one in, JP, I guess that you've got 2 options. You either bring one in who is an understudy. This is what Jared was talking about yesterday. Or you bring in one who is actively challenging Hart for his gloves. So I do think, we will bring in a goalkeeper, but not whilst we've still got Siegrist and Bain on the books. We don't want to get back into that situation where we've got 4 or 5 goalies.
Well, Brendan Rodgers has said in recent interviews that I've read that he's having talks with players, and right now there's a kind of ongoing assessment. Like, he's not just going to come in the door, take a look at a player for 5 minutes in training and be like, right, I don't want him, or yes, I definitely want him. He's got to assess how they are over the course of maybe even how they interact with the players while they're away in Japan. Like, he'll be watching all of that to see what sort of...
Is that why we're keeping James McCarthy good around the dressing room?
Who knows? That we spoke about that when he signed, and we were like, right, let's see how much game time he's had in a year's time. And in that year's time, he didn't play hardly at all. It's now been what, 3? Is it 3 years?
We're going into the third season.
Yeah, aye. And the amount of football he's played versus the amount of money that he's raked in is not really palatable for someone who spends a lot of money on Celtic. and I do. I'm one of thousands of people that buy a season ticket every year, and you don't want to see money. No disrespect to him, I'm sure he would have rather it worked out and he was a decorated Celtic player that had earned these medals and all the rest of it. But when things aren't working out like that, you kind of need to cut the cord in some way, like whether it's a loan move or whether it's a ripping up of the contract. Again, that's just sort of putting a plaster on it, because you're still spending the money to end the deal, aren't you? And I guess he'll be having the conversations with the players, I'm sure. And if he's had a conversation with Ben Siegrist, and Ben Siegrist has said, look, I've got personal things going on, girlfriend in Australia, whatever it is, I'm not sure I want to be here long term, or I'm not up for the fight, or I don't see myself being number one, or whatever the case may be. If that is the case, then obviously we need to look at finding him another club, and then at that point get somebody in who will be looked at as a potential number one, a realistic potential number one. I don't think did anybody really think that Siegrist, when he came in, was going to become Celtic's number one, because I didn't. I saw him as being a really good backup to Joe Hart. I didn't see him dislodging Joe Hart. If Paddy's comment about needing a new keeper is based on Joe Hart's mistake yesterday, then I think that's a bit harsh, because people can make mistakes. Players made mistakes all over the park yesterday, no doubt. Some were picked up, some weren't punished, and passes misplaced. A pass misplaced can lead to a goal.
Yeah,
it might result after another couple of passes, but that initial ball that's given away can lead to the breakdown in the defence in the midfield that leads to a goal where the keeper can't do anything about it. So when I saw Joe Hart do that, my immediate thought wasn't, oh, we need a new keeper. And certainly by the end of the half, he'd made enough saves to make you think, right, okay, this guy's not he's almost been made out to be kind of like a has-been. He's 36. In goalkeeper terms, that's not that old. I would hope that I'm not the only one flying a flag for Joe Hart at this point, because I see him being able to bring too much else to the table. And I wouldn't just be like, oh, well, we'll just keep him because he's a strong figure and he's got experience and he's good in the dressing room. He's also a good keeper. He's not a bad keeper. And if this is to be his last season, then I would rather he went out as number one at the end of this season, or this coming season, and we have somebody else already in situ who he's worked with, and he's sort of been able to pass on that experience of being a Celtic keeper with a view to. I mean, that would be the discussions I would be having if I was Brendan Rodgers and an agent and everyone else. Would be like, well, the type of keeper we want to get is somebody that we see as being the number one from next season, being ready in this season, but to be number one next season.
I mean, if you look through the amount of goalkeepers we've brought in, JP, over the time, and I'm talking about kind of backups, almost brought in as a backup. When we had Boric and we brought in Zaluska, remember? Quite a similar type of signing, actually. A goalkeeper who was standing out in Scottish football for Dundee United, as it happens. And you bring him in, you think, it's safe enough as a backup. I think Siegrist was very similar to that. And over the time, there's been quite a few goalies we've brought in. Remember Brown? We brought in Brown from Inverness Cali Thistle, Mark Brown, and it's as if they're never going to play, but they're just kind of bench warmers. It's unfortunate that we don't have someone who is coming through the ranks, because even Uwalayemi was brought in from Spurs youth setup. It's not like he's Callum McGregor, having been at the club since he was an embryo. and then we've brought him through, and then you can get him to train with Joe Hart. So, yeah, I think that it is something that will depend on the future of Siegrist as much as Joe Hart, but we will see more signings coming in. There's plenty to talk about, and I'm keen to bring in the comments. Double Denim, you're in. Lots of positives in the game yesterday. Side still has really good attacking depth. Defence needs strengthening, and yes, possibly a goalkeeper. But firmly believe we'll be in good shape for the season. I think we will be as well. And you've just got to remember, we're talking about that comment that was made just last week about Celtic being weaker. It was actually Chris Sutton that made it. We're weaker than we were last season. And I think you're basing that on one player. You're basing it on Jota. But then you look at, right, okay, let's compare Ange to Brendan. What does Brendan bring to the table that improves us as well, JP? Because I'm sure there are plenty of things that Brendan brings to Celtic that is going to improve players, it's going to improve performance, shape, and ironically enough, I think defensive as well. I think Brendan will improve that defence. I think he'll definitely do it. And when you're shipping 6 goals in a friendly, it's never nice. I remember the feeling when we did that against West Ham 2 years ago, but it was nothing like that yesterday. It didn't feel the same sting yesterday as I did that day. I watched that game and thought, we're in trouble against West Ham. We were all over the shop. I didn't really get the same vibe yesterday. I'm basing a lot of my view on yesterday's game on the first half. I think we tired really badly, and then the players we brought on, the side had no real shape after that, JP. It was just like chuck a lot of bodies on and hopefully it'll work, and it didn't work. But on the Daisameda one, right, I was just looking through 18 months he's been at the club. He was signed for something in the region of 1.6 million quid, right? He's now 25. So we've had him for best part of 2 years. 71 appearances, 19 goals and 12 assists. And he's a type of player that you just looked at, you thought, under Ange, he was always going to play because of what he brought to the team. He allowed you to play the high press. His work rate was unbelievable all over the park. One really bizarre game last season against Hibs at Easter Road where he seemed determined to get sent off. Don't know what that was about. But I've always thought about him as a left winger. And Liam Carrigan continually told me through that period, you know what, he's a centre forward. But you just could not think of Kyogo not playing. Since Kyogo's come to the club, he's got to play. And because of that, he's seen off Giakoumakis. So Maeda's adaptability has got him a lot of games, JP, if centre forward is his preferred position. He's played there in 45 minutes, scored a hat-trick, missed 2 other chances, one of which was an audacious effort from about 40 yards. And you're looking at him going, wait a minute, Liam Carrigan's right here. He is a centre forward. Now, it doesn't change my view on Kyogo. Kyogo is by far and away the number one choice up top. We've got O as a backup. He is that guy you're talking about as the goalie, somebody who can learn from the number one pick. O is that guy up top. And then you're thinking, well, Maeda's a great option now as a third option through the middle, which I didn't buy into that idea until probably yesterday, even though he represents his country there. Does it change your mind on us, or maybe your mind was already set, on us going out and getting another centre forward? I did think we needed another forward. I'm watching that yesterday thinking, you know what, we're pretty well covered now.
I don't know. I would still like to get in a striker, or like a proper number 9. And I know that sounds like fantasy because they cost a lot of money, and we'll need to have done our homework really well to find somebody that no one else has found that would come in and do this sort of business that we want. And that maybe sounds a bit greedy because we have got Kyogo and he's so good, but Kyogo has missed time as a Celtic player. I mean, despite his amazing goal return, he's missed quite a lot of games, hasn't he? I mean,
he has.
A good 2 to 3 months, maybe more. So
it's at least 3 months over the piece. At least 3 months. Yeah.
And maybe people would think that's natural, but I would still be concerned if we picked up a couple of injuries and were mid October into November. You don't want to be in the Champions League where you're having to play players that you don't want to necessarily. You wouldn't necessarily play. Like last season we were playing Jens, and who played centre half at Real Madrid away? Was it Jens and Starfelt?
Starfelt, yeah. Starfelt came back in for that game, actually.
Yeah.
Yep.
after having been out for a while as well. He was kind of suddenly back in the team. So I don't know. I'd be slightly nervous if we're looking to compete on all fronts, Champions League and the league and the 2 domestic cups. There's a lot of football, and you don't want to be burning guys like Keogh go out, because we saw what happened when we pushed him back too soon and he broke down against St Johnstone.
St Johnstone, Joey Dawson came on that day.
Yeah, I mean that's where you don't want to find yourself. So I don't know. It would be my preference that we would go out for another striker, because Maeda, it obviously shows his flexibility, and those stats that you read out, I don't think that tells the full story about his contribution over the last 18 months, because it doesn't record him just appearing out of nowhere and harrying somebody who's got the ball and just running into them and just making his presence felt and dispossessing that player. See the amount of times I've seen him do that? I mean, that's like more than 30, 40 times I've seen him do that. And how valuable is that? If somebody's looking to make a break up the park against you, and then all of a sudden Maeda just appears, I mean, opposition players must hate playing against him.
Oh, absolutely.
I would imagine that there's definitely been chat about when a Celtic team is read out before a game. There's no way there's not been a good few occasions when opposition players have been like, "Oh no, that Maeda's playing."
Absolutely. Tavernier. And of course, he probably got the best assist of the season last season. That goal against Rangers for Jota's header at the back post. That was unbelievable. He's so active, so alive to what was going on. I think yesterday, what it more showed me, although there's a discussion to say that maybe he is our third choice striker, despite the fact that lacks salt and vinegar, Maeda is not a top level striker, but I think that what he could be is he could certainly be a third choice striker for Celtic. But what it does show and what it does highlight yesterday, him playing through the centre, is that we're a lot weaker on the left hand side. Haksabanovic is a major drop down from Jota. A lot of players would be. It's got to be said. Who else have we got on the left hand side? Right, I know Abada can play there, but I think he's more effective on the right. Mikey Johnson can play there. He's on my list of 10 that I think should leave the club. So it does show you that, if Maeda's not on the left, you're not getting as much down the left as you would like. What we saw yesterday was most of our attacking play came down the right-hand side. And, I asked before the game, JP, around the way that we use the fullbacks under Rodgers. Obviously, we've been playing inverted fullbacks for 2 seasons. Iwata was put in there at right back. Quick check of some of his Japanese appearances would show that he's played there quite a few times in the past. I thought he looked pretty comfortable. I'm going to be honest. I did have concerns after his first couple of attacks. I thought he was limited. He ends up getting himself an assist. Most of what we did went down the right-hand side. Abada had a great game. We'll come back to him. But I'm now looking at the left-hand side and thinking how weak that is at the minute, certainly without Maeda. Taylor and Maeda is going to make it a lot stronger, but then there's that question about, do you strengthen the left back area, because Taylor is perhaps going to be a different left back if he's not playing the inverted role, JP. So it begs all these different questions. But Abada is somebody who is in the news. Fenerbahce apparently are looking at him. Someone has said here that if Dominic Lekakovic, is that his name? Levakovic. Yeah. If he is still available, we should go for him. We were linked to him, but it looks as though Fenerbahce have won the race for his signing. Can I say that? It sounds a bit tabloid, eh? They've won the race for his signing, and he'll be jetting into Turkey very, very soon. But Leo Abada is on the radar of Fenerbahce. When you read the links and you read the speculation, and they're coming from Stephen McGowan, you get a bit worried, don't you? Because Stephen McGowan is generally pretty on the money.
I'm kind of like flip-flopped with Abada, because I was resigned to losing him. I thought he would be one of the first to go. And then all of a sudden, Jota's away to Saudi Arabia, and you're kind of thinking, wait a minute, if Abada's going as well and Jota's just gone and Hatate keeps getting linked away, that is starting to look a bit concerning in terms of the weakening of the squad, because, Abada, despite not being a first team regular, I mean, he's not, I don't know how many starts he's made, but it can't be anywhere near what the likes of Jota had made or Hatate's made. So you kind of think of him as being somebody that's maybe ready to make that claim for the first team jersey. But if he's been linked away, and it's all very well a club being interested in him, but whether or not he's interested in going there, I don't know. I don't know if that would be where he would see his next move. I'm sure he's been one of the ones that's maybe in a badly translated magazine has said that he wants to play in the Premier League.
Yeah, Liverpool, thank you.
Yeah, do you go over there to Turkey first of all and then make the move to England, or do you hope to get the direct route? Like, does he use Fenerbahce as Van Dijk used Southampton, or a sort of stepping stone to a higher level? I don't know. It depends whether or not he likes living in Glasgow and likes Brendan Rodgers as the new manager. Who knows? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he left, just given the level of rumour and media scrutiny over his transfer would lead you to believe that he's probably going to go. But I think he's got a lot to develop, and it would be good to see him develop under Brendan Rodgers, particularly because you'd like to think that Abada could be a similar, a player that Brendan Rodgers would sort of take, like he did first time round, and take a lot of those players and really move them up a level. Because the proof's there. He did it with many players in 2016, 2017. There was players that really found different levels to their game under him, and who's to say that Abada wouldn't do that? Haksabanovic, who you mentioned, I like Haksabanovic. I think there's a gallousness about him. I've said before, he reminds me of a guy I used to be at school with, John Connolly, and he really needs a big moment. See if by December he hasn't had a big goal, i.e. in the Champions League or against Rangers or something like that, then I'm sorry to say, but there's a massive question mark then over him. I think, and I don't think that's harsh to say, because he's been here long enough now to have staked a claim. He's got a fresh start underneath a new manager, and he always is always on the periphery of games. Like, looks like he's threatening to do something and it doesn't quite come off. So yeah, I think you need those big moments. Look how many big moments Jota had.
You need the big moments. You're right.
I mean, even in a defeat, he scored a free kick against Real Madrid. We've not had anything really. Haksabanovic obviously has scored goals. There's no doubt about it, and he can score goals. But you need them. You really need them to do them. Have it at the highest level possible, which is Champions League or scoring in the absolute crucial games against our nearest and dearest.
Now, by the way, on the flip side of that, because Jota did that time and time again last season, what he also brought to his game was, a game against St Mirren where we were really struggling to break them down away from home. And Jota was the guy that scored a really ugly goal to do it, and it didn't matter because he was digging in. Do I see that from Haksabanovic when the chips are down? Who are you looking at on the pitch to actually turn it round? Who's going to be the game changer here? I've not seen it yet, JP, so, I tend to...
The chance he had against Rangers where he was played clean through at Hampden. And I know he was like, I'll do it the next time. There's always a next time. It's like, well, you better do it the next time, because I don't think Brendan Rodgers will sort of not put up with, but I don't think he'll entertain a player that's not doing the business for him. Put it that way. You've got to come up, especially in a wide position where you'll be looking for him to do some serious damage. And right now, his damage is kind of minimal. He's not flattened anybody yet. No,
absolutely. And again, he can persevere with players, but you said at the very beginning there when you were making your point, he's been here long enough, right? So you're thinking to yourself, unless there's going to be a real impact on him being managed by Rodgers, then he's one of the players that we'll probably be discussing at some stage this season, Haksabanovic, because football moves on so quickly, JP, and you just cannot stand still as a player, because before you know it, you're out the loop. But you're right in what you said about Abada. If you want to compare his 2 seasons, even, because obviously you look at the appearances, 101 appearances already for Celtic, 28 goals, 20 assists. But in terms of minutes, in his first season, he played 3,296 minutes compared to 2,079 minutes in his second season. So he played a lot less football last season, but he's got a goal contribution over the piece every 112 minutes. And I agree with you. I think it's time for him to step out of Jota's shadow rather than just go for the first offer that comes in for him, be that Fenerbahce. If his ambitions to play in the EPL, you know what? We can give you that gateway. Celtic can give you the gateway to the EPL. You don't have to go to Turkey to get that move. So I would like to see him developing under Brendan Rodgers. There were regrets from at least Ryan Christie, from those who left us, quite soon after Postecoglou came in. Christie says that he would have liked to have worked with Postecoglou from what he's seen. I personally think that Christie would have worked brilliantly under Postecoglou. And I think Abada will work really, really well under Rodgers as well. Talking of positives, because we didn't want it to be doom and gloom, the other 2 players I want to mention are Rio Hatate and Matt O'Reilly from yesterday's game. And I know there's some people who might think that a certain player goes under the radar from time to time, i.e. Callum McGregor, etc. But Rio Hatate yesterday, I was speaking about him, and I said that, sometimes players just gradually improve season on season. I think the level of improvement from season 1 to season 2 was astonishing under Ange Postecoglou for Hatate. And I know this is only one game, but I'm looking at him yesterday thinking, he orchestrated the whole game yesterday, JP. And if he can make another step up, another incremental improvement next season, he's taken himself into a different realm in terms of his ability and where he can go in football. It worries me to a degree, because going back to what you said, once you hit that point, you're no longer at Celtic. So it does worry me to a degree. But I think that, I'm resigned to losing at least one. And I'm basing that on Postecoglou telling us we're going to lose 1 or 2. One's already left the building. I hope to God it's no Rio Hatate, because we simply could not replace this boy, I don't think.
Nah, he's definitely going to go for serious money. I mean, I read a tweet last night, and fair enough, it is just a tweet by a fan, but it was a fan of our nearest and dearest, who was predicting 20 million for Nico Raskan, and you're just like, maybe he will go for big money, but what are you basing that on? You're basing it on a handful of games. Mm-hmm. I think we are entitled to genuinely talk about Hatate for big money based on what we've seen of him and what we are seeing of him. Like, I don't understand how there's that immediate kind of, all right, he's going to go for X money and this is our model and everything else. It's like, okay, fair enough. Like, he might actually, over the course of next season, he might prove to be a standout performer who plays well in Europe if they get to the Champions League or Europa League or whatever. But I really don't know how they can base that on a handful of performances. When Hatate came in, everyone went mental about him. I don't remember anybody saying he was going to go for 20 million, but I remember everyone saying this guy's amazing and we've won a watch and this is like Moravchik and everything else, because he scored against Hearts. Remember the raker from like 25, 30 yards or whatever. And I at that time, and I remember saying it on here because people commented and being like, what are you talking about? You don't know football and all that. And I'm just trying to sort of dampen down the enthusiasm. I said he's very, very good, but I don't see this like immediate world beater. But I've watched him develop like we all have, and become a player that you can talk about in those terms, I think, now. And that's based on performances consistently over a period of time, rather than just being like what they're saying, oh, he's played like 5 or 6 games, world beater, he'll be at Real Madrid and all that, enjoy him while he's here and all this sort of stuff. It's like, no, I think our basis on Hatate can be fair in terms of what we think or he might might not do. I'd like to see him stay for, well, at least another season. If we do get him for another full season, I think we'll be very, very fortunate, because players just, he started football late, and time is not going to be there for him forever. Do you know what I mean? He's already, what, is he 24, 25?
Yeah, it's deceiving, because I don't tend to think of him as being as the same age as Maeda, for example, because he did come into senior football a lot later in terms of British football or European football, but it's normal in Japan, isn't it? Because but you're right, and by the way, the levels that he can hit, he's hitting them. This is the thing, right? Because you've got a lot of promise for players, JP, and then they either plateau or they tail off. A lot of the time, that's what happens. And you can go back on a lot of these broadcasts that we've done. I think we were bigging up Haksabanovic last season, November time. You could just look at the headlines. And by the way, they're out there, so we don't change that, because that's where we are in the moment. We're talking about it. But I remember saying, temper your enthusiasm here, because it's very early days. But I think what's happened since then is Hatate is improved unbelievably as a footballer. You can see how physically he's improved. He's so much more imposing than he was when he first came in, JP. And yesterday, what I noticed about him was the use of his body. Just getting in front of players, like using it legitimately, but using it to shield the ball and to change direction, which is unbelievable at. The way that he changes direction, he could be facing his own goal before you know it. He's facing the opposition's goal and he's already picked out a pass. He tries a difficult thing. So sometimes they passes end up, swerving out the park. But when they come off, they're unbelievable.
I know the pass you're talking about, when he tried to hit it with the outside his foot right through the entire midfield. I saw that, and as soon as it left his foot, I was like, I can totally see what he's trying to do there. He was trying to thread it through to Abada, and he's got that brain. And the best thing, the most obvious compliment you can pay him is that he is a first-team player at Celtic. That jersey's his. Nobody's getting that jersey off Hatate. Like, if people are naming their starting lineups for Celtic with that current squad and with the squad that's been there the last year and a half, he's in it. He's in the starting lineup. You'd be mad to not have Hatate if you're picking a Celtic starting lineup. I don't know what game you're watching. And as for combined 11s and everything else, if somebody else is in there over Rio Hatate, then I'd like to know who that player is.
I know. The colour of their tinted spectacles, if that's the case. Stephen Ray comes in. Welcome to the show, Stephen. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to comment, all you need to do is subscribe to the channel. Give us a big thumbs up while you're in there as well. The positives were Maeda as striker and Abada. Totally agree with that. Negatives, if people didn't already know, is the defence, including the goalie, needs upgraded. With Johnson and Carter Vickers, it's miles off UCL level. Yeah, I get that. And I know that we are in for apparently we are interested in a central defender by the name of Xavier Buyamba. And again, according to Stephen McGowan, this is a Stephen McGowan appreciation pod, this one. He's a 21-year-old centre-back, Dutch, playing currently for Volendam. He can also play right back. And he came through the Barcelona and Chelsea youth systems. He's played 41 first-team games in Dutch football. So I'm pretty sure there is a short and a long list of centre-halves that Brendan Rodgers is interested in. He could well be one of them. A lot of the time, these names come and go very quickly, JP. Now, I know we're running out of time. It's been a while since we chatted, which is why you and I, take a subject and probably end up going down the rabbit hole or indeed going on a tangent. But there is a jersey over your shoulder. And the reason I think this is so relevant this week is, well, first of all, tell us about the jersey. For anybody who's not into Hacienda, Factory Records, etc., tell us a wee bit about that jersey.
Well, I just thought I'd put it up because there's been the chat this week about the Celtic third jersey being inspired by the bright lights of the Glasgow music scene. And by the way, I do like that third jersey, as I do all the strips this season. I've not got gripes with any of them. I think they're all smart, but like the Manchester, it's where I was born. I absolutely love Hacienda, Factory Records, Folklore, Tony Wilson. Everything about that time is kind of I don't think the world would be the same without Tony Wilson and Factory Records and the Hacienda. I just don't think music would be the same. I think there was such a seismic shift in everything as a result of club culture that came out of Manchester, and there's many people that have got a lot more intelligence on the subject than me that have said that. Guys like Andy Weatherall and Carol Cox, all the bands and things that were inspired by the Hacienda and that came out of there, like the Mondays, the Roses, all of that. And I got that talk a couple of years ago, just because I thought it's really cool. It's like a football talk and music, so you can't really. I know there's a lot of social recluse stuff that goes on with that as well, so I like all that stuff. But as an actual Umbro, like Hacienda Factory Records top, so
it's a classic, and
that is actually inspired by music. There's no tenuous links.
No, you're right, and it's Use Hearing Protection, isn't it? It was from New Order release, designed by Peter Saville, who was virtually an in-house designer for Factory for a period. And you look at that and you think, well, if that's the home kit, the away one would basically just be, you just flip the yellow for the black and it would still look amazing.
I think there is a yellow one as well. I think.
Oh, superb. No, listen, I totally agree with you. I'm pretty sure that the press release came after the design rather than the other way about, JP, because I look at that and I think I really like it. It could possibly be associated with the vibrant Glasgow nightlife and music scene. However, it was good to see Big Bems as part of the promo campaign.
At the Barrow, and they launched it. I saw this behind the scenes video, and there was obviously, I don't think you couldn't really tell from the photo shoot that they were at the Barrowland, but when you saw the behind the scenes stuff, they were in the stairwells and all that with all the old posters that have been there for years, like Utah Saints on the wall and Public Enemy and stuff like that. So it's quite surreal to see Rio Hatate posing next to, I don't know, new fast automatic daffodils playing at the Barrowland.
Carter, the Unstoppable Sex Machine. Listen, there is a link actually between Factory Records and my next subject, because you'll know of the Durruti column, JP, and my favourite version of all time of the Fields of Athenry was actually recorded by the Durruti column. It's phenomenal. Seek it out.
Didn't know that existed.
Type it into YouTube, you will not be disappointed. Female vocalist, the works. The reason I bring up the Fields, I mentioned last week that Aslan are actually releasing their version of the Fields of Athenry today. It is their last recording that features their dearly departed frontman, Christy Dignam. So a lot of the older heads will have been into Aslan, I'm sure, back in the 80s. And, they were basically the band that a lot of people thought would become what U2 became. But due to other issues, they were maybe a bit too punk rock. It didn't quite happen to that level. But I mean, right up until fairly recently, they were still touring. I seen them in Edinburgh a few years back, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. And so their final release with Christy is going to be the Fields of Athenry. It's released today. Check it out. I noticed that the links, I shared the links actually earlier on today, but it did bring me back to the Fields and my relationship personally with that particular song. It's a song I still love, JP. And I think back to my mum and my old granny used to go to Knock with the chapel every year. Right, there's probably people listening to this going, "Oh, that's the same with my mother and all this," but they would go with St. Serph's and High Valleyfield. They would go with the Pineapple every year, go to Knock, and they would come back with loads of great Irish gifts. It was unbelievable, and I remember just after the World Cup in Italy, right, they came back with loads of stuff. I had the home Opal strip, the works, big posters of Pat Bonner at Italia 90, but they had this wee cassette, JP, and it was just Irish ballads, right? And there was a version of the Fields of Athenry on this cassette. First time I ever heard it, 1990. First time I ever heard the song, fell in love with it. But I personally can't remember hearing it, although I know it was being sung at Celtic Park before the example I'm going to give you. I can't remember hearing it until the Hampden season. I remember it being sung against Dundee United. We beat them 2-1. Tony Mowbray scored a last-minute goal. First goal was scored by Andy Walker. Jaron Nixon scored for Dundee United, you'll remember Ivan Golak saying he was a £40 million player. No sure where he went after that. But the Fields Athenry, I've always loved it.
It was 12. Let's not embellish it. It was definitely 12.
But what I've done there is I've used the converter of time, and it's now 40 million. And the next time I mention that story, it'll become 45. That was my kind of relationship with Fields, and I love it. But as I say, to this point, the Ruti column have recorded my favourite version of it. Aslan's version comes out today. What's your thoughts on the Fields? Because it is a song, obviously, it's been in the songbook since the 80s, as far as quite a few people have said to me, kind of late 80s, that's when we started singing it. I love it.
Well, weirdly, my dad, who was English, born in Bradford, came up to live in Scotland in 82, 83, after I was born in Manchester. So he loved Irish music, like not maybe some of the songs that we would hear on supporters buses and things like that, but like he did love, things like Clannad. He was a big fan of Clannad, but he also loved, like, he had like a vinyl of Irish folk songs, say, and Paddy Riley's Fields of Athenry was on that, and he used to play it all the time, and I'd be like, Dad, turn that off, that's rubbish. Like I was a wee boy, I was like 7, 8, I was pre my obsession with Celtic, and I certainly wouldn't have had any idea about Celtic singing it, Celtic fans singing it. And he genuinely would always play the Fields of Athenry was his favourite, and it wasn't because it was associated with Celtic. He just loved the song. I think he just thought it was a really beautiful song. And then when I started going to the games, and like you said, I don't recall, it was so early in my supporting Celtic life, I don't recall when it was started, but I do remember like starting to sing it at games, and then realising that it was the same song that my dad would play, that I would tell him to switch off, or be like, oh, why are you playing that old fuddy-duddy music or whatever. And then I found myself dropping the needle on that same Irish vinyl that he had, and listening to it, because that was the original, and it was the original that they would play at Celtic Park. It was the same exact version that they would play at Celtic Park, that I would listen to, that I could listen to at home. And obviously that's way before you had access to CDs or Spotify or anything like that. So that was my only way of listening to that song at home on my dad's old stereo. So it means a hell of a lot to me. And anytime I hear it at Celtic Park, I look up and I think of my dad. And I saw that clip of it was Paddy Riley, I think, in a pub with Glenn Hansard, the Frames.
Yes, yep.
And they're just singing it at like a table in a bar, and it's unbelievable. I'm sure it was. Was
that the funeral of Pete St John? I think that was it.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, yeah, it was the funeral of Pete St John's. I forget where, in Ireland, but they're just. You could tell they've obviously kind of said to him, "Well, how about you do this to Paddy Riley?" And then he's an old man. He's just sitting at the table. He's not belting it out. It's kind of hushed, but it's that classic way in an Irish bar when songs start in the corner of a pub or whatever. But it's with him and Glenn Hansard, and then you can tell everybody that's round about is all like, we're witnessing a really special moment here, and of course it was. But it's a great song.
Special song, JP.
Yeah.
Great memories, and I'm going to have to go and listen to that version, because I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. I've seen it on the socials, and for my part, I would urge you to go and listen to the Deruti column.
Oh yeah,
the song as well. Couple of minutes to go. We have covered quite a bit, but as always, there's loads more to cover, and we'll be covering that tomorrow as well. In relation to the new buys, there's been some information in relation to Kwon and Yang. There was probably, I said before, I'm just surmising, there was probably a plan to unveil them when we were in South Korea, JP. It's not happening. They're not going to join the Japanese tour either. So they are jetting in, to use that term again, to Glasgow, and all the deals and everything will be done then. But I am looking forward to the first signing from Brendan Rodgers, I guess. And you'll be able to identify it, I'm sure, as well. One last thing before we go. Llanelli Town, who obviously we signed Jock Stein from, have released their own version of the green and white hoops. Have you seen that? They announced
I've
it
not
yesterday.
seen it. I saw a post which was kind of, I guess, must have been the precursor to the announcement. You know, it was just like this coming soon or whatever. But I've not seen the actual strip. I take it it's smart.
Aye, they've no messed with the hoops. That's what that should always be in the design brief. Don't mess with the hoops.
There's been a few comments yesterday on the strip. Folk going, do you know what? It's actually not as bad. I don't know. I don't understand what the big furore was over, and I was like, well, neither do I. I'm glad people are sort of calming down a little bit. Obviously, there was still plenty of comments slagging it, and I'm led to believe that the sales probably haven't been as good as other Celtic strips. I mean, that's not a news flash, really, is it? That's the case. But I mean, it's one season. I hardly think we're going to be. I think they'll probably sell more as instead of like an initial burst. You'll probably find people just start picking it up in September, October, November when they're like, "Oh, I've got last season's strip. This season one's not too bad. I'll just get it," and the sales will just keep up a bit.
So, like in the old days, where a film could bomb at the box office, but then the VHS sales always kind of like made that resurge, like the Shawshank Redemption, because that didn't do well at the box office at the cinema, and it was the VHS sales. So I get what you mean, but you know what? I'm a traditionalist, JP. I'm a traditionalist. I think what next? Are they going to change it to zigzags next season? Have we given them the run of the place?
They'll dig out the Gola design.
Oh, do not do that, please. One final point. Ridiculizer comes in. Too much sentimentality for dressing room cheerleaders. I agree with that. I mentioned the stats actually on McCarthy. If you were to break it down in minutes, JP, when we signed him as a 30-year-old, he had played the equivalent of 9 games of football a season for the previous 5 years. That was his stats when we signed him, and we gave him a 5-year deal. And since he's come to Celtic, he's played the equivalent of fewer than 5 90 minutes games of football over 2 seasons.
That's horrendous. I mean,
shocking.
You can't dress that up any other way. There's nobody that can argue the case for that in any way. And I'm in no way saying that we should keep McCarthy because he's good in the dressing room and like that. I hope that comment didn't apply to Joe Hart, because I think Joe Hart's more than that. I don't think he's just a good guy in the dressing room. I think he's a good keeper, and let's, as Brendan Rodgers said, let's talk about stuff in May. And if we're sitting here in May and Joe Hart has got a champions medal around his neck, more than one, then I think you can safely say he's done a job. If things pan out differently, then yeah, fair play. But I just don't see him not being the number one keeper this season. I'd be very, very surprised if he's not. We'll see what happens.
We will. JP, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks everybody for getting involved in the chat on this Thursday afternoon. Thank you every single person who has commented. If you want to comment in the future, all you need to do is subscribe to the channel, give us a big thumbs up, and if you want to come along to our next live event, it's a week tomorrow. It's with Roy Aiken, and it's at Glasgow Barras Art and Design. Really looking forward to that one. A hero of mine from my youth, so just to meet him is going to be an absolute pleasure. To be able to share a stage with him is going to be mind-blowing, so I'm looking forward to that. All that's left for me to say, JP Mason, once again, thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.